Committee will be in order. What purpose does the gentlelady from Minnesota rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Designate the amendment.
Amendment number 50, printed in the congressional record, offered by Ms. McCollum of Minnesota.
Mr. Chairman, there's no volume.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 50, printed in the congressional record, offered by Ms. McCollum of Minnesota.
The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes. The gentlelady will suspend. The committee will be in order. I ask members to take their conversations off the floor on both sides of the aisle. Ask members in the well to take their conversations off the floor. Ask members on the majority side in the aisle to take your conversations off the floor. Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to thank the staff, committee staff on both the Republican and the Democratic side, and I would like to thank the floor staff for their patience, their hard work, their dedication, and their help to me this evening. Mr. Chairman, my amendment ends tens of millions of dollars of taxpayers' dollars that are being wasted on sponsorships of NASCAR race cars by the Department of Defense. Mr. Chair, I hate to do this. The House is not in order.
The committee will be in order.
Gentlemen, I can't hear.
Members take their conversations off the floor on the minority side. Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. As I said, my amendment ends tens of millions of taxpayers' dollars from being wasted on sponsorship of NASCAR race cars by the Department of Defense. With trillion-dollar deficits, this amendment is where the rubber meets the road for my Republican Tea Party colleagues who want to cut wasteful spending. Defense Department waste is nothing new. Many Americans remember in the 1980s the Pentagon was spending $400 for a hammer, $600 for a toilet seat. Well, now we have the Army spending $7 million for a decal on a racing car. Talk about taxpayer sticker shock. For $7 million, the Army buys a decal on a race car and a few driver's appearances. But it's not only the Army spending millions of dollars. The Air Force sponsors a NASCAR race car for millions, and so does the National Guard. And incredibly, over the past decade, hundreds of millions of taxpayers' dollars have subsidized race car owners, millionaire drivers in the name of military recruitment. Now here's the $7 million question. Does slapping a sticker on a race car convince a young man or a young woman to volunteer to serve our country in the armed forces? Not according to the Marine Corps. Fact, in 2006, the Marine Corps dropped its sponsorship of NASCAR. A Marine Corps spokesman said, and I quote, "We don't have a tracking mechanism to track how many people contracted because of seeing an advertisement on the hood of a car," end of quote. A fact, the same year the Coast Guard dropped a $5 million NASCAR deal. Fact, in 2008, the Navy dropped NASCAR sponsorship saying, and I quote from the Navy, "It's not always easy to measure a return on investment." Unbelievably, that year, the Navy also paid one driver, Dale Earhart, Jr., the outrageous sum of $800,000 in taxpayer funds, twice the salary of the President of the United States, just to make public appearances. For all the tough budget cutters in Congress, you should know that the Citizens Against Government Waste has endorsed this amendment. So I would urge my Republican colleagues who are cutting homeless veterans, cutting law enforcement officers, cutting firefighters, why not cut some real waste and at the same time free NASCAR from its dependency on the American taxpayer? This amendment gives members a clear choice: a vote to end wasteful spending or a vote to keep wasting the American people's money. And I urge a yes vote to end the funding to NASCAR. And I want to stress again, many parts of the military were using NASCAR sponsorship as part of their drive for recruitment. They found that they could not track the success of this program, and so they ended it using their resources towards something that they knew that they could track, knew that they had something that was successful. So members, I urge you to end the taxpayer funding to NASCAR. Let's put the dollars to work in the Department of Defense for something they know that is trackable and accountable. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield my time back.
Time. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word and speak in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 5 minutes. The gentleman will suspend. Committee will be in order. I ask members to take their conversations on the minority side out of the aisles. Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, we support the gentlewoman's effort to ensure that every taxpayer dollar is spent wisely and effectively. Our committee has always been focused on that. Effective recruiting is critical to the military's ability to attract new, qualified military men and women and maintain our all-volunteer force. The Department of Defense uses its sponsorship of NASCAR and other sporting events to create awareness of the different military services and the unique advantages and programs that come with serving our nation. Quite frankly, Mr. Chairman, it's a great public-private partnership. NASCAR sponsorship has proven to be a very cost-effective recruiting tool, with some estimates stating that for every dollar the military puts in NASCAR sponsorship, it gets $4 in equivalent in advertising through television, merchandise, and other outlets. We believe the dollars are well spent, and thus I oppose the amendment and yield to Mr. McHenry of North Carolina for any remarks he may have.
Well, I want to thank my colleague from New Jersey for yielding. Let's be clear. This amendment will not save one single dime. My colleague from Minnesota is simply misinformed. Every dime spent in this sponsorship program is measurable. You can measure the number of media impressions you have, which the U.S. Army's participation in NASCAR sponsorship netted at 484 million media impressions, 34 million of which were offered specific Army recruiting messages. So let's be very clear. This sponsorship is about recruiting. This amendment is about politics in certain districts for certain groups of people, but the vast majority of NASCAR fans, 1 out of 5 NASCAR fans, have served or currently serving in the U.S. military. It's a target-rich environment for Army's recruiting message and a target-rich environment for military and the military message. And so I would just urge my colleagues to vote against this irresponsible amendment that is certainly politically charged, but at the end of the day will not save the taxpayers one single dime. And I yield back.
Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Minnesota. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman,
gentlelady,
I rise to request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Minnesota will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk, number 232.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 232, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Nadler of New York.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes. The gentleman will suspend. The committee will be in order. Gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased to offer this amendment along with the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lee, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Starr. The continuing resolution provides approximately $100 billion for Department of Defense operations in Afghanistan. This amendment states that not more than $10 billion of the funds made available by the bill may be used for military operations in Afghanistan. The intent is clear. It is time to bring U.S. involvement in the war in Afghanistan to an end and to bring our troops home. The war effort in Afghanistan is no longer serving its purpose of enhancing the security of the United States, which should be our goal. We were attacked on 9/11 by al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda had bases in Afghanistan. It made sense to go in and destroy those bases, and we did. We had every right, we have every duty to destroy bases which are being used to plot attacks against the United States. But the CIA tells us that there are now fewer than 100 al-Qaeda personnel in all of the country of Afghanistan. Congress and the American people helped greatly reduce U.S. involvement in Iraq. Through the elections in 2006 and 2008, we forced a new direction in Iraq and helped bring thousands of troops home. We must now do the same in Afghanistan. The intent of this amendment is to reduce the funding for Afghanistan sufficiently to leave enough funds to provide for the safe and orderly withdrawal of our troops, but not funding for ongoing combat operations. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Wolf, earlier today said he would propose an amendment to establish a blue ribbon commission to examine our war effort and to ask the question of how best to fight the war. With all due respect, that is the wrong question. The right question, the first question, is why do we need to fight this war at all? It is past time to admit that our legitimate purpose in Afghanistan to destroy al-Qaeda bases has long since been accomplished. But it is a fool's errand to try to remake a country that nobody since Genghis Khan has managed to conquer. What makes us think? What arrogance gives us the right to assume that we can succeed where the Mughals, the British, the Soviets failed? No government in Afghanistan, no government in Kabul has ever been able to make its writ run in the entire country. Why have we undertaken to invent a government that is not supported by the majority of the people, a government that is corrupt, and tried to impose it on this country? Afghanistan is in the middle of what is at this point a 35-year civil war. We have no business intervening in that civil war. We have no ability to win it for one side or the other, and we have no necessity to win it for one side or the other. This whole idea of counterinsurgency, that we are going to persuade the people who are left alive after our firepower is applied to love the government that we like, is absurd. It will take tens of years, hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, tens of thousands of American lives, if it can be done at all, and we don't need to do it. It's their country. If they want to have a civil war, we can't stop them. We can't choose the rulers that they have. We don't have to like the rulers that they have, and we don't have to like their choices. It's not up to us. At this point, we must recognize that rebuilding Afghanistan is both beyond our ability and beyond our mandate to prevent terrorists from attacking the United States. And if it be said that there are terrorists operating in Afghanistan, that may be. But it is also true of Yemen, Somalia, and many other countries. We do not need to invade and conquer and occupy all those countries. And Afghanistan provides no greater necessity or justification for military operations and occupation. We are debating on this floor hundreds of budget cuts, cuts that will grievously hurt millions of Americans in order to reduce our expenditures by about $60 billion. Yet we are throwing $100 billion a year, $100 billion a year, plus countless lives, down a drainpipe for no useful purpose at all, and with very little discussion of our purposes and of whether our policy matches our purposes. To continue so bad a policy at so high a cost is simply unconscionable. It is unjustifiable to sacrifice more money and more lives this way. and I urge my colleagues to join me and Ms. Lee and Mr. Stark in voting to bring the U.S. involvement in the war in Afghanistan to a close. Vote for this amendment. Let's bring our troops home. Let's stop wasting our lives and our money and our treasure and our forces. Let's bring our troops home. Let's devote our resources to something that helps the people of this country. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to strike the last word and in opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to debate the issue of the war in Afghanistan. The fact is we're there. Our soldiers are getting hurt every day, and too many of them are dying. So we're not going to debate that particular part of the war. What we're going to debate is this amendment. This amendment, and I've said in the last 3 days a number of times, we're not going to do anything in this defense appropriations bill in the savings that would have an adverse effect on the warfighter. This amendment would affect the warfighter, especially those in Afghanistan. This $10 billion that the gentleman would leave in the fund to finance the operations in Afghanistan, that's already been spent. In the first quarter of this fiscal year, the Afghanistan operation cost $16 billion, and he would only leave 10, which means we're already in deficit of $6 billion during the first quarter of the year. Well, what kind of confusion would there be in Afghanistan immediately? What would our troops be thinking? Where would they have to go? What would they have to do? What would the rules of engagement be? You can't do this to our soldiers, our war fighters who are in Afghanistan. Don't let this amendment, because of the political tone relative to feeling that we should be in Afghanistan or we shouldn't be in Afghanistan. The fact is we're there. Our soldiers are fighting. They're getting hurt. They're dying. The fact is we can't let them hang out there without proper funding. Now, if you want to bring the troops home from Afghanistan, the truth is $10 billion won't even accomplish that. It'll take more to bring everybody out of Afghanistan that we have deployed there with the equipment, with the infrastructure, with the headquarters. It would cost them much more than the $10 billion the gentleman leave just to redeploy
Would the gentleman yield on that
back
point?
to the United States of America.
Would the gentleman
So this amendment does affect the warfighter, and I will not support any part of an appropriations bill or an authorizing bill that has an adverse effect on those who stand to fight for America.
Would the gentleman yield
back my time?
Gentleman yields back his time. The question is on. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
Thank you. I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, first of all, let me just thank Congressman Nadler for his ongoing support, consistent support for efforts to end the war and for offering this amendment, which is really very straightforward. Let me just yield 10 seconds to the gentleman from New York for a response and a comment.
Thank you. The remarks of the gentleman from Florida were incorrect. This amendment limits $10 billion from this CR, enough to bring the troops home during the pendency of this CR. Funds that were already spent were appropriated from the previous CRs, so it hasn't already been spent.
Let me just be clear, reclaiming my time, be clear up front that our servicemen and women have performed with incredible courage and commitment in Afghanistan. They have done everything asked of them. But the truth is that they have been put in an impossible situation. In fact, this concern of war without end is why I oppose the resolution. I know we disagreed with that, but many of us agree now that we should not have this war without end continued. But I oppose the resolution authorizing military force on September 14 because it was a blank check, I believe then, and it remains one now. There are few things we know with certainty regarding the situation in Afghanistan. We know corruption persists unabated, and in many cases has been fueled by the U.S. occupation and influx of foreign cash. President Karzai has proven himself time and time again unwilling or at least unable to meaningfully root out corruption within his own administration. We know that the United States troop presence has increased from somewhere around 5,000 troops in 2002 to more than 100,000 troops in 2001. At the same time, military and civilian casualties have increased at record rates. In 2010, unfortunately, that was the deadliest year in Afghanistan. We also know that al-Qaeda's presence in Afghanistan has been all but eliminated. The administration has been consistent in its assessment that there are maybe between 50 and 100 members of al-Qaeda remaining in Afghanistan. The fact is, the modern threat of terrorism can emanate from the tribal regions of Yemen or, yes, a hotel room in Germany. It's not feasible or in our national security interest to address this threat through a military-first, boots-on-the-ground strategy. And we know, as military and foreign policy experts from across the political spectrum have told us repeatedly, that the situation in Afghanistan will not be resolved by a military solution. The United States has squandered more than $1.1 trillion on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Economists estimate the total direct and indirect cost of these two wars by their end may be a total of $6 trillion. No one can deny that the increasing costs of the war in Afghanistan are constraining our efforts to invest in job creation and jumpstart the economy. At the same time, we are fighting here in Congress to protect investments in education, health care, public safety, public health, transportation. The war in Afghanistan will cost more than $100 billion in 2011. Regardless of the situation in Afghanistan, the Pentagon will come back to us and ask for more time, more troops, and more resources. If we're not doing so well there, they'll ask for more time, more troops, more resources. If we're doing well there, they will say we want more time, more resources, and more troops. So it's time to say enough is enough. It's time to begin the safe and orderly withdrawal of U.S. troops and military contractors from Afghanistan. We should do so today. I speak today as a daughter of a lieutenant colonel who fought in several wars, one who knows the trauma and the devastation of wars on families. And so I want to just thank Congressman Nadler for his leadership, and I hope that we all will support my legislation that I introduced today, the Responsible End to the War in Afghanistan Act. Thank you again. I yield the balance of my time.
The time of the gentlelady has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise.
Gentlelady.
I'd like to move to strike the last word.
The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I rise to support the Nadler-Lee-Stark amendment, and I'd like to thank them for bringing this amendment to the floor. I'd like to thank all of them and the other progressives in this House for the work that has been done in an attempt to make sense out of the war in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and all of the traveling, the speeches, the organizing that's been done around this war issue. We continue to fight to bring our troops home. I know that there are those who would think, perhaps because they have not heard a lot from us, that somehow we had removed ourselves from this struggle. But that's certainly not true. We have been respectful. We have allowed this administration to make some commitments. The American people decided to give the administration the opportunity to work to bring our troops home, and we're still committed to that. But this amendment that we are basically dealing with today would provide the CR would provide $100 billion for military operations in Afghanistan. That doesn't sound as if we're trying to wind down. That does not sound as if we're ready to recognize that it's time to get out of Afghanistan. Why are we there? Unfortunately, this war has been very traumatic on our soldiers, on their families, and on the American public. Yes, as it has been said over and over again, we salute our soldiers. We appreciate the sacrifices that they have made, and have they made sacrifices? More suicides in this war and in the Iraq war than we've had in all of the wars of the United States of America. It breaks my heart to hear about the brain injuries and the loss of limbs that these soldiers have suffered. Why is this happening? What are we doing? In Afghanistan, Leon Panetta, the head of the CIA, says there's less than 100 al-Qaeda operatives in Afghanistan. That is more than $1 billion per al-Qaeda operative. Why are...
Gentlelady will suspend. Committee will come to order. Gentlelady will recognize.
Thank you. Again, let me reiterate. The CIA tells us there's less than 100 al-Qaeda operatives in Afghanistan. At the rate that we're going, CR providing $100 billion for military operations, that is more than $1 billion per al-Qaeda operative. Our amendment would limit the funds for military operations in Afghanistan to $10 billion to provide for the safe and orderly withdrawal of forces. As we stand here debating this $100 billion allocation in the CR, I cannot help but contrast that with the fact that our domestic agenda is being cut and cut and cut, not only by this CR, but by the budgets, both from the opposite side of the aisle and the White House. The homelessness is shameful in America. We have people who are wondering how they're going to keep their homes warm. We're cutting heating oil in America. The environment is taking a licking with this CR. At the same time that we talk about innovation and creating jobs, I don't see anything in this CR that will create any jobs. What I see is unwise expenditures, such as we're witnessing for the $100 billion. What I see on the opposite side of the aisle is a dedicated commitment to getting rid of regulations that could save us money and create jobs. And so, led by the progressives, we stand strong in our commitment that this war must end. We must bring our soldiers home. It is time for us to concentrate on the domestic agenda. There are those who would tell us we're training the military in Afghanistan. We're going to have Afghanistan soldiers who are ready to take over. I don't see that happening. What is win? What is success? How do you define it? I haven't found anybody on the opposite side of the aisle who can define that. And I would say that it is time for us to have the courage to do what must be done. Let's support the Natler Lee Stark Amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time. The chair would remind members that the rules do not provide for members to walk between the chair and the speaker. Gentleman from Colorado, what purpose do you rise?
Motion to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. The ongoing war in Afghanistan is quite simply the wrong war, in the wrong time, in the wrong place. Intelligence experts agree that a terrorist threat to our nation does not emanate from within the borders of the nation of Afghanistan. There is a very real terrorist threat to the people of this country, but by its very nature, it is a stateless menace. It's a menace that's likely to use as its base of operation wherever anarchy prevails, wherever the rule of law is lacking. We cannot effectively combat this threat by occupying one country after another after another. It is true that when we occupy a country, al-Qaeda and other terrorist operations will likely flee for other areas. But there are, unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, plenty of areas of the world that provide a hospitable foothold for al-Qaeda, which is why a more effective strategy that this nation is currently also engaged in, but is to a certain extent not complementary with the heavy-handed occupation strategy. A more effective strategy is very light-targeted operations, intelligence gathering and operations against terrorist operatives wherever they are. To be bogged down in one particular nation-state, one that is host to a negligible number of al-Qaeda operatives, it's been estimated that there are only 50 to 100 al-Qaeda operatives, is simply counterproductive to the goal of keeping the American people safe. Beyond being counterproductive, Mr. Chairman, this is money that we can't afford. This amendment, which I strongly support, will cut $90 billion from the occupation of Afghanistan, allowing $10 billion to be used to safely bring the conflict to an end and maintain a lighter footprint of military operations to ensure that al-Qaeda does not regain a stronghold within the borders of Afghanistan. It's clear, Mr. Chairman, that the current strategy is not working. The expenditures in Afghanistan under the current CR are $100 billion. That's more than $1 billion per al-Qaeda operative that's within the borders of Afghanistan. Most of al-Qaeda's operations have moved across the border to Pakistan. They've gained a foothold in Yemen. And meanwhile, we remain bogged down in a costly war without any clear endgame that can be articulated by the people on the ground. When we enter a military scenario, it's critical to define what success looks like. The nation-building operation undertaken with regard to the occupation of Afghanistan does not have a clear outcome that is reachable. The situation there will not be better in 6 months or a year, in 2 years or 3 years. It's time to stop sending American taxpayer money that we don't have to a war that does not further the security interests of the American people. That's why I'm a strong supporter of the Nadler-Lee-Stark Amendment, and I encourage my colleagues to vote yes, and I yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler.
I thank the gentleman for his remarks and for yielding. I just want to make one comment on what was said a moment ago by the gentleman from Florida. This amendment reduces funding in this CR to $10 billion, which should be enough to withdraw the troops. But the argument was made that to reduce the funding is not to support our troops, to rob them of the implements of doing their jobs. But the fact is, the only power that Congress has to effectuate the war-making power, to control whether we should be at war somewhere or another, is the fundraise, is the power of the purse. We are not saying that we want our, by adopting this amendment, we would not be saying that we want our troops there with no weapons and so forth. We'd be saying use the funds to bring the troops home. It is more supportive of the troops to bring them home from a war that they should not be fighting, that is not vital to our national security. It is more supportive to bring them home than it is to give them weapons to fight an unnecessary war in which some of them, unfortunately, will lose their lives. So I say support our troops, bring them home, support the country, stop fighting where it doesn't make sense, and spend our military resources where it helps the national security of the United States, which is not in Afghanistan right now. I thank you. I yield back.
I'd simply like to conclude that the passage of the Nadler-Lee-Stark Amendment as part of an underlying continuing resolution will allow America to focus on the real stateless terrorist threat to our nation by preventing us from being bogged down in one particular occupation in a country that has no significant al-Qaeda presence. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. What purpose does the gentlelady from Texas rise?
Rise to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Let me thank the chairman, and I want to thank the authors of this amendment, which I rise to support, the Nadler and Stark and Lee amendment. I believe it is a starting point, and for those of us who have consistently raised questions about where we are and making sure we follow and adhere to long-standing commitments to our troops and to their families that have served boldly and ably, both in Iraq and now in Afghanistan, how we can orderly bring them home. Mr. Chairman, a couple of years ago, as we continued to feel frustration in Iraq, I raised the question and filed legislation called the Day of Honor, in which we would bring our troops home from Iraq and then subsequently Afghanistan and honor them throughout the nation. In fact, I remember arguing with the Bush administration and raising the issue as to why our fallen soldiers, when they came into Dover Air Force Base, did not have the honors of public view if agreed to by their family. I believe our troops are owed a debt of gratitude, respect, and honor. And those that are fighting now deserve that respect and honor. This legislation in no way dismisses or diminishes their service or the blood that they have shed. But what it says is that we are now in the midst of a major budget crisis. And as we have seen over the last 24 hours, we're willing to cut children and substance abuse and mental health and teachers and environmental protection, if you will, oversight, literally gut the running of the government. These soldiers want to come home to jobs. We've done nothing about creating jobs. I frankly believe this is a starting point of astute analysis as to what we're doing going forward. We already know that we're looking forward to bringing troops home and to downsizing, redeploying. We begin redeploying by redeploying money. And let me give you an example. On the floor just a few hours ago, there was an amendment discussed by the Transportation Committee to almost gut the Transportation Security Administration. I chair that subcommittee in the last Congress, and I serve as a ranking member in this Congress. If we had done that, it would have had a double detriment to the security of the homeland. 900 positions would have been lost, impacting 450 airports, governing some 445,000 TSO officers. Maybe some of those officer positions could go to returning soldiers who are looking for work. In addition, it would impact the intelligence gathering and disseminating. It would also impact covert testing that goes on at passenger checkpoints and also cargo, where we have seen that we're still in the eye of the storm. There is no doubt that aviation travel is in the eye of the storm for homeland security and protecting the homeland. So while we have $100 billion set aside for a war of which we have already been given the direction as downsizing, redeploying, bringing troops home, and yet we have $100 billion. So I would simply say this is a time when we should come together and determine that we are moving to bring our troops home, that we're going to use smart money and work on diplomacy, getting Afghanistan to invest its monies that it has in building democracy and educating its children. We support that. I recall one of my earlier visits to Afghanistan, taking books to school children and the excitement of the schools way beyond Kabul, where they were excited to receive these books and the students were excited to receive and to be able to be educated. Of course, in leaving Afghanistan and going to Iraq, we've lost certainly momentum that had been gathered, and schoolgirls can't even go to school. But that comes through diplomacy and buying in to a sovereign nation that believes in some dignity for all people. So I applaud the troops that are on the ground. I applaud their leadership. But if we have amendments that would gut the Transportation Security Administration and keep us from protecting the homeland, then we know that we're going in the wrong direction. Support an amendment that reduces the amount of money to be spent for Afghanistan, to invest in the homeland and the security of that homeland, and promote agencies like the Transportation Security Administration agency that's fighting every day to secure the American people. I ask my colleagues to support the amendment, and I yield back.
The time of the gentlelady has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, rather.
Gentleman from New York.
I ask for the ayes and nays.
The ayes and nays are requested. The gentleman asked for a recorded vote. Gentleman asked for a recorded vote.
Yes, I do.
Recorded vote is requested pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule, or Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Missouri rise?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, I'd like to enter into a colloquy with Mr. Goodlatte from Virginia.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I yield to the gentleman from Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to enter into colloquy with the chairwoman. Madam Chairman, without consulting with my office in any way, the General Services Administration took advantage of the lack of specific congressional direction in the stimulus bill and initiated renovation work on the Richard H. Poff Federal Building, a federal building in my district in Roanoke, Virginia. This renovation was funded at $51 million. However, the total costs for the renovations are now in excess of $65 million when you factor in the relocation costs for the agencies that were located in the Poff building. I have repeatedly demanded a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis from the GSA showing that this project is financially worthwhile as is required by law. To date, I have not received such an analysis. It is completely unacceptable for GSA to move forward any further with this project until such an analysis is produced. I would like to request that you and the committee commit to working with me to demand that the GSA provide a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis that shows these renovations are worthwhile before any further funds are appropriated to renovate this federal building.
I thank the gentleman for Virginia, and please know that not only am I very happy to work with the gentleman on trying to conduct better oversight of the GSA and ensure that it does cost-benefit analyses, but I have also had quite a similar experience in my hometown in Missouri of cost overruns and no type of real cost-benefit analysis or explanation for those cost overruns other than perhaps inattention to detail. And so I'm thrilled to be able to work with you and look forward to doing that.
I thank the gentlewoman.
I yield back my time, except for the fact that we have another colloquy, so let's try to fit it in. All right, I'll yield back to the gentleman.
Mr. Chairman, I now rise to enter into a colloquy with the gentlewoman, with the chairwoman. Madam Chairman, I intended to offer an amendment that would have prevented funds from being used in this bill to subsidize wireless phone service in the underlying legislation. As you know, the Universal Service Fund provides federal money to subsidize landline and cell phone service for low-income individuals. I can understand the need to ensure that low-income individuals have a basic telecommunications link of some sort for emergency calls. However, the state and local governments are the appropriate levels of government to provide this service. Especially, I do not believe it is the role of the federal government to be subsidizing cell phone service. Would the chairwoman commit to work with me on report language in the fiscal year 2012 appropriations bill addressing this issue?
I thank the gentleman from Virginia for bringing this to our attention and commend you for doing so, and we'll be happy to work with you to try to address this issue, particularly in report language in the FY 2012 bill.
I thank the chairman and yield back to her.
I yield back balance of my time, Mr. Chair.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk, number 214, printed in the congressional record.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 214, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Klein of Minnesota.
The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In an op-ed published in the Wall Street Journal, President Obama laid out his plan to conduct a comprehensive regulatory review to, quote, remove outdated regulations that stifle job creation and make our economy less competitive, close quote. I pledge to be a partner in that effort. Job creation and American competitiveness are our top priorities. That's why I'm offering an amendment to deny funds from being used to implement and enforce a job-destroying Department of Education regulation. More than 3 million students attend proprietary schools. These schools, also known as for-profit schools or career colleges, provide students with skills that can be applied immediately to specific jobs in the workforce. With more than 6 million workers unemployed for more than 26 weeks, proprietary schools address a critical need in today's economy. These schools also help address the needs of local communities. Proprietary institutions are nimble and easily adapt to the demands of an ever-changing local economy. If a community lacks trained nurses or qualified auto mechanics, proprietary schools can quickly develop programs to fill those needs. For years, proprietary schools have served young adults, single parents, first-generation college students, and low-income individuals. They've opened doors to bright futures and strengthened our economy. That's why the recent efforts by this administration have been so troubling. Last year, the Department of Education put forward regulations that will deny students access to many of these institutions. The regulation includes a number of provisions, including unprecedented reporting requirements placed solely on the backs of these proprietary schools. The regulation also requires schools to seek pre-approval from the Department of Education before creating any new program, tying down in bureaucratic red tape the flexibility that has benefited communities and workers. The public outcry to the regulation has been resounding. More than 90,000 public comments were sent to the Department during the rulemaking process. A strong bipartisan coalition of members of Congress has voiced their concerns to the administration, but those concerns seem to be ignored. In 2008, Congress had an opportunity to define, quote, gainful employment, yet it chose not to. It recognized such a definition would limit student choice and stifle employment. Instead, the administration is barreling ahead with bad policy. We all support transparency and accountability. We should empower students with good information about all institutions so they can make the most informed choice about their education. We should do our part to root out bad actors. We can do that while opposing an outright attack on the private sector. That's what this is, an attack on the private sector of education. Colleges that plan to expand their campuses have put those plans on hold. This effort will force schools to turn away students and close their doors. Some have already laid off workers. Capella, based in my home state of Minnesota, announced just yesterday they will lay off 125 staff members. The regulation is destroying jobs today and will continue to do so. Make no mistake, this isn't just another regulation that will destroy jobs. This is an assault on students' ability to find an institution that best meets their needs. The President has laid out a goal to lead the world in college graduates in less than 10 years. This goal represents the reality that far too often our workers are unprepared to succeed in a highly competitive global economy. But we cannot lead the world if we follow this path that this regulation would force us to take. Let's support our students. Let's support their right to choose a college that meets their needs. Let's support a strong and competitive workforce. I ask my colleagues to support this amendment. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. For what purpose, the gentlelady from Connecticut rise?
To claim time in opposition.
The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in opposition to the Klein Amendment, which would prevent the Department of Education from moving forward on a rule that would deny federal financial aid to career education programs that leave students in too much debt and without gainful employment. The new gainful employment rule will hold career education programs responsible through a simple proposition. A career education program should only receive federal financial assistance if, upon graduation, students can earn enough money to pay off the debt that they accrue. In short, a program is worth the federal investment only if the price of the education is justified by its outcome. Isn't this exactly what responsible budgeting is all about? This rule will apply to both for-profit and non-profit colleges. But the for-profit sector has mounted an aggressive lobbying campaign in opposition. Why? The average tuition at a for-profit college is several times greater than at a community college. For-profit college students account for only 10 to 12% of college students, but they receive 23% of all federal student loans and grants. Graduation rates at for-profit colleges are at or below 50%, while their profit margins are as high as 30%. 25% of for-profit school students default on their loans after 3 years. If we're going to build the workforce of the future, we need to increase the number of Americans with college degrees. But students should not have to mortgage their futures to pay for college. And they should be secure in knowing that when they graduate, they will have a degree or a credential that will help them to secure a job and to repay their student loans. Leaving college without a credential or with one that is of little value in the job market can leave students unable to climb out of debt. And that is what happens to far too many students who have been taken in by the aggressive marketing tactics of for-profit colleges. Why would any college contest the idea that an education should be worth its price tag? Colleges are in business to educate students, not simply to take their money. This rule will protect both students and taxpayers. I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back.
What purpose does the gentleman from Montana rise?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As chairman of the Subcommittee on Appropriations Subcommittee on Education, we have no objections to this amendment. I've often said jokingly, of course, is the reason...
Does the gentleman move...
Strike the... Excuse me, to strike the last.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I've often jokingly said the reason that the Internet is so successful in America is that the government hasn't figured out how to screw it up yet. Well, they're doing everything they can to screw up education. We finally get an institution or a structure that is able to move very quickly to meet the needs of students, and this government is trying to create a bureaucracy to keep them from being successful, and it's inappropriate. The Department of Education is attempting to define through new regulation what it means for someone graduating from proprietary school to be gainfully employed. Wouldn't that be nice if we applied that same standard to our public school system around the country, that our students had to be gainfully employed before they received any money? This is a prime example of federal overreach. Fear of this regulation is having real economic impact now, even before it goes into effect. Schools are already scaling back program offerings because of the threat of this gainful employment regulation. And if it goes final, approximately 5.4 million students could be shut out of higher education by 2020. Portions of the regulation are set to go into effect this July 1st of 2011, so it's necessary to include this language in the continuing resolution. Waiting for the fiscal year 12 appropriations process will be too late for these schools. Business groups, ranging from the National Restaurant Association and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, support this, as well as various state chambers of commerces. They all support this amendment and oppose the regulation, and I'll hope you do the same. I yield back my time.
Gentleman from Montana yields back his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I seek to strike the last word in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I always tell people in my district that the government was smart enough after it invented the Internet, it turned it over to the private sector to grow it. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, this amendment should not be adopted. It should not be adopted because this amendment is designed to disrupt the regulatory process to determine whether or not students who enroll in some, and I say some, I say this as a supporter of proprietary colleges and career colleges, some classes that only leave them in debt, don't leave them better prepared for the workforce, don't leave them better prepared for the career. There's substantial evidence that that's the case. High default rates, students not completing, and students ending up in a lot of debt. They're doing this with almost 90% of taxpayer dollars. I think we have an obligation to those students and to the taxpayers. That's what the administration is trying to do with this regulation. It's been mentioned that there were 90,000 comments. 89,000 of them were a form letter. You thought they could have varied it a little bit, huh, for the money they're paying to get it out, but they didn't. But the point is this, that the administration ought to be allowed to complete this process, because this really is about the future of these students. Students from these schools, in many instances, graduate with much higher debt. Some of these schools, they default in excess of 45% of them end up in default. And as you know, that is not debt that you can discharge in a bankruptcy. So these students start out in big trouble if these schools are not providing the kind of educational atmosphere and hopefully the success ratio that they should. That should be a concern to every member of this Congress. That should be a concern to the taxpayers, and it is a concern to this administration. If this regulation doesn't turn out, the Congress can tell them they can't do it. That's our power. That's the way it works. But to come in the middle of the game when it's this serious, with this much money on the table, this much of the taxpayers' money, with these kinds of default rates in some of these institutions and some of these classes, we're making a big mistake by putting our thumb on one side of the scale at this point in the process. As I've said, from the time I've been on this committee, as these schools started to grow and become more and more a part of our higher education, I have supported them. I continue to support them. Somebody just said, if you're going to meet the goal of college graduates, it's hard to believe how you would do that in this country without these schools. But as we all know, you put 90 cents out of every dollar coming from the taxpayer on the street, there's always a few people who show up to pick it up without providing the services. We went through this in HMOs back in the 90s. There were people who said they were becoming health care HMOs. No, they were really real estate companies who were trying to get a lot of people to enroll, and hopefully they could sell them to somebody else. In this one, it's a question of whether or not you're offering a curriculum that truly benefits the students, gives them the opportunity. But you know, when we see the kinds of scandals that have erupted in the past in some of these institutions, again, not all of them, you have to ask the questions, what's going on? People have paid tens of millions of dollars in fines because of how they've attracted the students. When you have a business plan that's based upon attracting homeless people, you better make sure that there's some opportunity for that homeless person to thrive in that educational class other than just end up in debt and still homeless. That was a business plan. So I think that I'm just asking for caution. I know you want to run an adjustment. I know the power of these institutions. And I know the pressure that they're saying you have to stop this, you have to stop this. We're talking about a few classes within all of these institutions where there's a history, it may be very well be a history, that all the student got out of it was debt. This isn't about what you end up doing in your career over time, but it's about whether or not you got what you paid for and they delivered the services that they promised. I would hope that Congress would reject this amendment. We'd let the department continue to work on the regulation. And again, if it doesn't work, it doesn't make sense, and it's a threat in these schools, I suspect that we'll all join in making sure that the regulation doesn't go into effect. Thank you very much. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chairman. Excuse me. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of this amendment. Over the past year, a number of us have met with Education Secretary Duncan to express our serious concerns with any proposal that evaluates education programs based on the level of debt students are accumulating. Despite improvements that have been made to the rule, I remain concerned about the direction this rule is taking our education system. I understand and agree with those who are concerned about the high cost of education. But shouldn't we let students and their families evaluate for themselves whether the risk of carrying a high debt load is one they want to take on? It seems to me to be a far better use of our resources would be encouraging informed decisions by putting out accurate information to students about graduation rates, placement rates, and even average student debt burdens. The fact is, career colleges are meeting a community need by educating and training people in specific professions like nursing. In 6 short years, we're 1 million nurses short in this country. If there are problems with a specific program, and there are many, in fact, that may be bad, there may be bad apples in this industry, let's come up with criteria that actually evaluate the program's effectiveness. Either way, I think it makes sense to put a halt to this rule and use the additional time to urge the Department to go back and put out a rule that will ensure students continue to have access to educational choice. I urge adoption to the rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
I move to strike the last word in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I rise to oppose the amendment, which is a broad, sweeping measure not only against important protections for students, which I will elaborate on, but it also wipes aside important protections for taxpayers and taxpayer money. This amendment would not only eliminate the ability to have the critical gainful employment regulations some element of quality control to make sure that after receiving sometimes very expensive education, somebody is actually more employable, but it would also undo existing transparency that's already approved and published. It would disallow basic information on student outcomes, including graduation rates, as well as loan default and payment rates. Now, the reason this is such an important matter to Congress is that this is a critical matter for taxpayers. Taxpayers have been paying the cost for excessive loan default rates of poorly performing for-profit colleges. Specifically, the for-profit higher education sector received $24 billion in Title IV loans and Pell Grants in 2009, accounting for about a quarter of the federal college loan dollars, despite them comprising only about 10% of the higher education institutions. Meanwhile, the students from the for-profit colleges have loan default rates after 3 years about twice the rate of all college defaults and rising to 25%. Now, again, these are averages. The strongly performing for-profit institutions, and we certainly have nothing against whether an institution's for-profit, non-profit, government, that doesn't matter. What matters is, does it work? Does it work for kids? Are they getting their money's worth? Are taxpayers getting their money worth by helping people attend these institutions? Or are we graduating students with a mountain full of debt, no more employable than the day they walk through that door? Making the matter even worse, in 2009, the average tuition of the for-profit universities is $14,000 per year, compared to $7,000 per year for average four-year universities and $2,500 for community colleges. Now again, what I would look at would be the return on investment. Are they providing twice the value of four-year community college? The data says no. Are they providing 6 times the value of community colleges in making somebody employable in their future salary? The answer, by and large, again, is no. That's why the Higher Education Act authorized the Education Department's regulations that this amendment would block. I strongly support the process that the administration has gone through, including the process on the rule on gainful employment. The administration is not tuned a deaf ear to the industry, to the legitimate concerns of quality operators. The first rule that they put out there was, I think they've acknowledged, had some room for improvement. They've been working diligently in conjunction with the responsible players in the for-profit education industry to establish a real playing field to ensure that we are not doing these students and taxpayers a disservice through this program. GAO has detailed the issues in its report last summer, and the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights wrote to the U.S. Department of Education that this rule will benefit minority students as they disproportionately enroll at for-profit schools, overpaying for a poorer quality education as compared to the public counterparts. The proposed rule is a reasonable way to ensure gainful employment for students, and I applaud the administration for taking on this difficult battle, especially for minority students, to ensure transparency and protect taxpayer funds. I urge a no vote on the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. For what purposes?